Hey there, sleepy wasteland wanderers. Tonight, we're diving into the haunting beauty of the Fallout universe, where broken cities whisper forgotten stories, and every shadow hides a tale of survival. I'll be your guide through these glowing ruins, sharing quiet moments of hope, resilience, and the eerie calm of a world long gone. Welcome, wanderer, to the spaces between the markers. Tonight, we do not follow the quest structure or the named destinations or the specific geography of the Pip-Boy's official map. Tonight, we wander into the locations that the map does not mark, the places that exist in the wasteland's margins, that require the specific quality of attention that has no defined objective to find, and that reward the finding not with experience points or quest completions, but with the specific kind of human story that the wasteland tells most honestly when it is not trying to tell a story at all. The unmarked locations are where the wasteland keeps its truest self. Settle in, let the Geiger counter tick its patient rhythm. Let us wander. The dining table in the house on the edge of the capital wasteland's suburban geography is still set. This is the first thing to establish about the specific category of unmarked domestic location that the Fallout franchise has distributed across its different regional settings, with the specific consistency of a world-building commitment, the commitment to preserving, in the specific arrested condition of the moment the world ended, the specific evidence of what the specific people who lived in specific houses were doing in the specific hours before everything they were doing became permanently and catastrophically irrelevant. The table is set because someone was setting it when the bombs fell, or had set it in anticipation of a meal that was going to happen in the next hour or the next few minutes. And the specific act of table setting had been completed, and the specific meal had not been eaten, and the specific people who were going to eat it had not been in the position, after the bombs fell, to eat anything ever again. And the table has remained set for 200 years in the specific condition of the moment when the people who set it last engaged with it. The plates are there, the cutlery is there. Whatever food the pre-war kitchen had been preparing in the specific hours of October 23rd, 2077, has long since ceased to be food in any sense that the word applies to. But the specific arrangement of the domestic space that the food was being prepared to occupy is still there, preserved in the specific way that the wasteland preserves everything it has not actively destroyed in the exact condition of the moment of ending, minus whatever 2 centuries of unmaintained physical existence has taken from it, which is considerable, and which is also somehow not enough to eliminate the specific quality of the original arrangement that makes the table's continued setting the most specifically affecting thing in the house. The suburban houses of the capital wasteland are not named locations in the Fallout 3 geography. They exist between the named settlements and the marked quest destinations as the specific background texture of the pre-war world, whose existence the named location's proximity cannot fully represent as the specific evidence that the civilization that built the city also built the specific domestic environments of ordinary life that surrounded the city, and that those environments were inhabited by specific, ordinary people whose specific, ordinary lives. The bombs ended with the same comprehensive finality that they applied to the lives of the people whose connection to specific institutions and specific historical events made them available to be named and tracked by the official geography of the franchise's quest structure. The named locations document the specific history. The unmarked suburban houses document the specific life that was happening around the specific history, the life that was not organized around any particular institutional significance, but was simply being lived by specific people in specific houses in the specific way that the majority of people in any civilization live their lives, which is in the specific domestic texture of daily existence, rather than in the proximity to the events that the historical record subsequently identifies as the period's significant content. What a careful examination of any of these houses reveals about the specific family that inhabited it is limited by the specific character of the available evidence, which is the physical evidence of domestic arrangement and the documentary evidence of whatever personal materials, letters, holotapes, terminal entries, personal notes the house happened to contain at the moment of ending, preserved in the same arrested condition as the table and the cutlery and the specific arrangement of the rooms. The children's bedroom is perhaps the most specifically affecting room in any of these houses. The specific room whose contents document not simply a life, but a life in its earliest and most specific developmental stage, whose toys and decorations and the particular quality of the space that had been organized around a child's daily existence communicate something about what was in that house. That the adult rooms, more institutionally legible, evidence does not reach. The toy is on the floor beside the bed, in the specific position of a toy that was being played with, rather than a toy that had been put away, which communicates something specific about the time of day when the bombs fell in relation to the specific child's specific routine. And the communication is available to anyone who enters the room and notices the toy and performs the specific inference that its position makes available, and the specific knowledge it produces that this child was playing with this toy in the specific hours of October 23rd is knowledge whose emotional weight is entirely disproportionate to its historical significance, which is 0, and entirely proportionate to its human significance, which is everything. The Fallout 4 Commonwealth's domestic locations carry an additional dimension that the Capital Wastelands unmarked houses do not fully replicate, which is the dimension of the player's own pre-war experience. The specific fact that Fallout 4 begins in the pre-war world shows the player a version of the domestic environment inhabited and alive and organized around the specific daily life of a specific family in the specific hours before the bombs fell, and then freezes that environment in the same arrested condition that the Capital Wastelands houses have always occupied, and deposits the player into it 210 years later. The Commonwealth's unmarked domestic locations carry the weight of this pre-war prologue with them in the specific way that things carry weight when the frame of reference that makes their weight legible has been directly provided rather than requiring inference. The player who walks through a Commonwealth suburban house that the game has not named or quested has walked through a Commonwealth suburban house that was alive 210 years ago, not in the abstract sense of knowing that it was inhabited, but in the specific sense of having inhabited one themselves, of having stood in a room very like this one on the morning of October 23rd, and having experienced the specific quality of a domestic space organized around living before the bombs converted it into the specific condition it now occupies. The unnamed Commonwealth houses are the most affecting unmarked domestic locations in the franchise, precisely because the franchise has provided, in its pre-war prologue, the specific experiential reference point that makes their arrested condition most directly legible as loss rather than simply as historical evidence. The specific personal materials that the unmarked domestic locations contain are the dimension of these locations that the franchise has most carefully calibrated to communicate the specific character of the lives the locations document. The letters left unfinished on the kitchen counter, the holotape that a parent had made for a child who was somewhere else when the bombs fell, the journal whose last entry is dated October 22nd, and that contains in that final entry the specific, ordinary concerns of a specific, ordinary life on the last day before everything ordinary ceased to be possible. The unfinished letter is the single most affecting documentary artifact in the franchise's unmarked domestic location inventory, not because of any dramatic content, which unfinished letters rarely contain, but because of the specific quality of incompleteness that the unfinished letter embodies, the specific evidence of a communication that was interrupted by the specific event that ended the communication's context before the communication itself could be completed. The The person who was writing the letter was writing to someone they were going to see again, or were hoping to see again, or were addressing in the specific register of a relationship whose ongoing character the letter's tone assumes without stating, and the letter is unfinished because the bombs fell before they finished it. And the relationship whose ongoing character the letter assumes had no ongoing character after October 23rd, because one or both parties were no longer alive to maintain it. The unfinished letter to someone who is not coming, this is what the franchise has placed on the kitchen counters and the desktops and the bedside tables of its unmarked domestic locations. And it is the specific artifact whose unassuming character most directly communicates the specific thing that the franchise is always trying to communicate, which is that the most important thing the war destroyed was not the civilization, but the specific, ordinary human connections that the civilization was the container for. The franchise's consistent formal choice to not mark these locations, to not attach quest markers to the suburban houses, to not provide the specific institutional framework of a named investigation that would direct the player's attention toward the domestic evidence and organize the player's engagement with it into a narrative with defined objectives is itself a meaningful formal decision rather than simply an artifact of the game's design process. The unmarked domestic location requires a specific kind of engagement from the player that the named location does not. It requires the player to choose to enter, to choose to look, to choose to perform the specific work of inference and emotional engagement that the environmental evidence makes available without directing anyone toward it. The player who finds the table still set, and who notices the toy on the bedroom floor, and who reads the unfinished letter on the kitchen counter, has found these things through a specific choice to engage with the wasteland in a particular way, a choice that the quest structure does not incentivize, and that the Pip-Boy's map does not facilitate, that emerges entirely from whatever quality of attention the player brings to the specific act of moving through the wasteland without a defined destination. This specific quality of attention, the attention that does not know what it is looking for because it is not looking for anything in particular, is the specific quality of attention that the unmarked domestic locations require and reward. And it is the specific quality of attention that produces in the player the most direct available engagement with what the franchise has consistently understood as its most important material, which is the specific human reality of what the bombs destroyed. What the full accounting of the franchise's unmarked domestic locations reveals about the specific civilization they document is the accounting that the franchise has always been performing through its most careful world building. The accounting of a civilization examined not through its institutional history or its political economy or the specific events that its official record had identified as significant, but through the specific daily texture of the specific lives that its specific members were living in, the specific spaces it had built for them to live in. The houses are the civilization's most honest self-portrait, more honest than the government buildings and the military installations and the corporate headquarters and the research facilities that the franchises named locations so comprehensively document, because the houses were not organized around any particular institutional purpose that would have shaped their contents in the direction of that purpose. The houses were organized around living. The living was ordinary. The ordinary is exactly what the franchise's named locations cannot fully document, and what the unmarked domestic locations preserve in the specific arrested condition of the moment when the ordinary became permanently and device, catastrophically unavailable to the specific people who had been organized around it. The table is still set. The toy is still on the floor. The letter is still unfinished on the counter, addressed to someone who did not receive it, in a handwriting that has not moved in 200 years, waiting with the specific patience of the inanimate for a reader who the writer could not have anticipated, and who finds it now, 2 centuries later, in the specific condition of evidence that has been waiting all this time not for the letter's intended recipient, but for whoever would eventually wander past with the specific quality of attention to notice it. The children of the wasteland did not choose to be born into the specific conditions that the Great War produced for the people born after it. This is the first observation that the franchise's unmarked locations, documenting children's experiences of the post-war world, most insistently require the observation that the specific human beings whose existence the locations document are human beings who arrived in the world after the specific decision that produced its current condition had been made by people who were not them, in institutions they had not been part of, through processes of institutional competition and resource conflict, and the specific terminal logic of a civilization that had been moving toward its specific endpoint for decades before the children who inherited the endpoint were born. The children of the wasteland are the most specifically innocent, available inhabitants of the specific conditions the war produced. Innocent, not in the moral sense that children are sometimes described as innocent, as though innocence were a property of the developmental stage rather than of the specific relationship between a person and the specific events that produced the conditions of their life, but innocent in the precise causal sense that the specific catastrophe that organized their existence was a catastrophe they had no part in producing and no opportunity to address before it had already determined the specific conditions into which they were born. They inherited the wasteland. The wasteland was not a thing that any child had ever chosen to inhabit. The unmarked location in Fallout 3's Capital Wasteland that documents a child's death in the specific form of a small skeleton in a specific arrangement, in a specific location that the Pip-Boy's map has no marker, for is a location that the franchise placed with the specific intentionality of a developer who understood what the location was doing and chose to do it anyway, chose to place the specific evidence of a specific child's death in a specific location in the wasteland where the player would encounter it only if the player was moving through the wasteland in the specific mode of unmapped attention that the location's unmarked status requires. The arrangement of the evidence communicates what happened with the specific directness of physical evidence that has not been curated for any particular narrative purpose. The skeleton is small, which communicates the age of the person whose skeleton it was, and the specific location of the skeleton relative to the specific features of the surrounding environment communicates the specific circumstances of the final hours in a way that the player who takes the time to read the environmental evidence can reconstruct with sufficient specificity to understand what the franchise has placed in this specific corner of the Capital Wasteland. The location is not marked. There is no quest attached to it. There is no NPC whose dialogue references it. There is no institutional framework that acknowledges its existence as something the wasteland contains. It is simply there, in the specific place where the franchise placed it, available to whoever wanders past with the specific quality of attention required to notice it and the specific willingness to engage with what noticing it produces. The children's drawings that appear in unmarked locations across the franchise's different regional settings constitute a specific documentary category whose particular quality of testimony is distinct from any other form of evidence that the wasteland preserves. A child's drawing is the specific product of a developmental stage at which the relationship between what a person experiences and what a person can communicate about their experience is organized around the specific, limited, but genuine expressive capabilities that childhood provides, around the marks that a child's hand can make, and the specific visual vocabulary that a child's developing representational capabilities have assembled from the Losky specific environment the child inhabits. The drawings that appear in the unmarked locations of the Capital Wasteland and the Commonwealth are drawings of the specific environment the drawing children inhabited, which was not the environment of the pre-war promotional materials and was not the environment that the Vault-Tec advertisements had promised, but was the specific environment of the wasteland, the specific landscape of ruins and radiation, and the particular social formations that post-war survival had produced in the communities where the children had grown up. The figures in the drawings are stick figures with guns, or stick figures running from undefined threats, or stick figures arranged in the specific domestic configuration of a family unit whose specific character the drawing's limitations cannot fully render, but whose specific emotional significance to the child who drew it is visible in the specific care that the drawing's execution demonstrates. These are not the drawings of children who grew up in safety, drawing their safe lives. These are the drawings of children who grew up in the wasteland, drawing the wasteland as they experienced it, which is to say, drawing it as the normal world rather than as the catastrophic departure from normality that the comparison with the pre-war world makes it. Because the children who drew these drawings had no experiential reference point for the pre-war world, and therefore no framework within which to understand the wasteland's conditions as catastrophic, rather than simply as the specific conditions of the world they were in. The unmarked location in Fallout 4's Commonwealth that documents a child's experience of the post-war world through the specific combination of a small shelter and the personal effects it contains, the improvised bedding, the specific toys that had been salvaged from the wasteland's ruins rather than manufactured for a child's use, the drawings on the interior walls that document the specific landscape visible from the shelter's specific location, is a location that the game does not name and does not quest and does not direct the player toward through any element of the official geography of the Commonwealth's navigable space. The player finds it by wandering, by moving through the Commonwealth in the specific mode of unmapped attention that has no defined destination, by noticing the shelter in the specific way that the attention, without a fixed objective, notices things that the attention organized around reaching a specific destination moves past without engaging with. The shelter is small. It was built by or for a small person. The specific materials of its construction reflect the specific resourcefulness of post-war improvisation, the salvaged boards and the repurposed metal, and the specific combination of available materials assembled into a structure that serves the functional purpose of shelter without serving any of the aesthetic or comfort purposes that the pre-war world's purpose-built domestic environments had provided as a matter of course. Someone lived here. The drawings on the walls are their testimony about what living here looked like from the inside of the specific experience of being the person who lived here, what the sky looked like from this specific vantage point, what the ruins in the immediate vicinity looked like from the specific perspective of a child for whom the ruins were not ruins but were simply the landscape, what the specific people or creatures or environmental features of the immediate vicinity looked like in the specific visual vocabulary that the drawer had assembled from their specific experience of the world. The children's journals that appear in unmarked locations across the franchise are the most directly verbal form of testimony that the franchise has placed in these locations, and the most specifically affecting form in the specific sense that the verbal record of a child's experience is simultaneously more legible than the visual record and more difficult to distance oneself from more legible, because language is the medium through which the player receives all of the franchise's non-environmental storytelling, and more difficult to distance oneself from, because the specific quality of a child's written voice, with its specific developmental limitations and its specific directness of expression, and the specific gap between what the child is experiencing and what the child's developing language capabilities can fully articulate, produces in the reader the specific form of engagement that children's testimony has always produced in adults who encounter it. The specific combination of recognition and helplessness that comes from understanding clearly what a child is describing and understanding equally clearly that the child who described it cannot be reached. The journal entries are dated. This is among the most specifically affecting features of the children's journals, in the franchise's unmarked locations. The specific fact that a child who was keeping a journal in the post-war wasteland was keeping track of the dates, was organizing their record of their experience around the specific temporal framework of days and months and years, in a context where the institutional infrastructure that had given dates their original significance had ceased to exist, where the specific social calendar that the pre-war world had organized around holidays and institutional schedules and the particular rhythm of the school year had been eliminated, along with the institutions that had generated it. The date at the top of each journal entry is evidence of a child who was maintaining the specific form of temporal organization that a journal requires in a context that had eliminated most of the social content that the temporal organization had previously served, who was keeping track of the days, not because the days had the specific institutional content that the pre-war calendar had assigned to them, but because keeping track of the days was itself the specific form of orientation toward time and continuity and the particular quality of personal history that a journal represents. The dates are evidence that the child who wrote them understood themselves as a person with a history, as someone for whom yesterday and today and tomorrow were distinct in ways that mattered and that were worth recording. The wasteland did not eliminate this understanding from the children born into it. It preserved it in the specific form of dated journal entries, in the small notebooks that appear in the franchise's most carefully observed unmarked locations. What the franchise's unmarked locations documenting children's experiences reveal about its most fundamental moral commitment is the commitment that every careful engagement with these locations makes most directly visible. The commitment to the specific moral weight of the specific vulnerability of childhood in conditions that had eliminated most of the institutional infrastructure through which the pre-war world had managed that vulnerability. The schools and the pediatric medical facilities and the child protective services and the specific social and institutional frameworks through which the pre-war world had organized its collective responsibility for children's welfare were gone. What remained in their absence was what always remains when institutional infrastructure is eliminated: the specific human commitment of specific individuals to the specific children in their immediate vicinity, and the specific vulnerability of all children who were not within the radius of such a commitment. The unmarked locations documenting children's experiences document both of these things: the evidence of children who were cared for by specific individuals who made the specific choice to organize their lives around that care in the specific conditions of the wasteland, and the evidence of children who were not within the radius of such a commitment and who navigated the wasteland's conditions with the specific resources that their developmental stage provided. The radio signal that broadcasts from an unmarked location in the capital wasteland has been broadcasting for 200 years before the lone wanderer picks it up on their Pip-Boy's scanner. This is the specific temporal dimension of the last transmission locations that the franchise has placed in the wasteland's unmarked geography, with the specific consistency that communicates a genuine thematic commitment, the dimension of the communication that has been ongoing in the wasteland's radio frequencies, or in the playback capacity of a holotape recording, or in the terminal that is still running in a location that no one has visited in decades, waiting for an audience that may or may not materialize, addressed to someone who may or may not still exist to receive the address. The transmission is the specific evidence of a human communication impulse that the catastrophe has separated from its function, has taken the specific act of reaching toward another person through the medium of language or sound, and has left the reaching without the person to be reached, the communication without the relationship that gives communication its purpose, the voice speaking in the wasteland's empty frequencies, with the specific patience of a recording that does not know it, is not being heard. The most specifically affecting of the franchise's last transmission locations are the locations organized around a radio signal around the specific form of communication that travels through the wasteland's air in all directions at once, addressed to no one in particular and to everyone within range simultaneously, whose existence in the frequencies that the Pip-Boy scanner monitors is itself the evidence of the transmission's continued operation, regardless of whether anyone has been within range to receive it. The radio signal in the capital wasteland that the player encounters in the course of unmapped wandering that appears on the Pip-Boy's scanner as an unknown frequency that the player must choose to tune to before the content of the signal becomes available is a signal that has been broadcasting since before the player character emerged from Vault 101, since before the current generation of Capital Wasteland inhabitants was born, since before any living person in the Capital Wasteland had been old enough to operate a radio receiver. The signal predates everyone who could currently receive it. It was produced by a specific person for a specific audience in the specific circumstances of a specific moment that is now 200 years in the past, and it has continued to broadcast across the full span of those 200 years because the equipment that broadcasts it has continued to function, and because no one has been present to turn it off, and because the specific human communication it contains has not been received by the specific person or the specific audience it was addressed to, which means that by the specific logic of a communication whose transmission has not been interrupted, it has not yet completed its function as communication, even though it completed its function as broadcast in the moment of its original transmission. The content of the last transmission matters less than the specific character of the last transmission, as a form less than the specific fact of a voice speaking in the wasteland's frequencies to an audience that is not there, in a message that was composed in the specific emotional circumstances of a person who understood that they were addressing someone they might never see again, or were addressing the frequencies in general because there was no specific person available to address, and the specific act of speaking felt necessary regardless. What the last transmission communicates through its form, rather than through its content, is the specific observation that human beings in extremis reach toward other human beings, that the specific impulse to communicate is sufficiently fundamental to what human beings are, that it continues in conditions that have eliminated the specific social infrastructure that gives communication its ordinary social function, that it finds expression in the radio frequencies and the holotape recordings and the terminal entries, not because communication in those forms serves any of the specific social purposes that the pre-war world's communication infrastructure had been organized to serve, but because reaching toward another person through language is the specific thing that human beings do, when the alternative is the specific form of isolation that no communication infrastructure can address, because it is not a problem of infrastructure, but a problem of being a person in the specific conditions of genuine extremity. The holotape recordings that appear in unmarked locations across the franchise are the most intimate form of last transmission, the most directly personal, the most specifically addressed, the most clearly produced in the specific circumstances of a specific relationship, rather than in the general address of a radio broadcast. The holotape that a parent recorded for a child who was somewhere else when the bombs fell, that the player finds in the specific unmarked location where the parent had been when they made the recording, that has been waiting in the specific location where it was left, in the specific hope that the child it was addressed to would come looking for it. This specific form of last transmission is the franchise's most direct engagement with the specific dimension of the catastrophe that the institutional record cannot adequately document, which is the dimension of the relationships that the bombs separated at the specific moment of their separation, and that the wasteland subsequently provided no mechanism for resolving. The parent who made the recording for the absent child did not know, at the moment of making the recording, whether the child was alive, did not know whether the specific message they were leaving would ever be received, or whether it would simply wait in its specific location for whatever duration of time passed before the location was, entered by someone who was not the intended recipient. The message was addressed to a specific person. The specific person may not have survived to receive it. The message has been waiting in its specific location for 200 years, in the specific condition of a communication that has not yet been received by its intended recipient, and whether it ever will be, is a question that the franchise leaves open not through negligence, but through the specific formal choice to not mark the location, to not attach a quest to the holotape, to not provide the institutional framework of a resolution that would tell the player what eventually happened to the child the parent was addressing. The terminal entries that function as last transmissions are the form whose specific character most directly documents the specific experience of the person producing them in the specific circumstances of their production. The terminal entry is not addressed to a specific recipient in the way that the holotape recording is addressed, is not broadcast into the frequencies in the way that the radio signal is broadcast, but is written into the specific institutional memory of a specific machine in a specific location, in the specific way that people write into records when they are processing their experience through the act of documentation, and when the act of documentation itself is the specific form of engagement with the experience that the circumstances permit. The terminal entries in the franchise's unmarked locations that function as last transmissions are entries in which the writer is aware that they are writing their last entry in which the specific circumstances of the writer's writer's situation have made clear to them that what they are adding to the record is the final addition they will be in a position to make. The awareness of finality changes the character of the entry in ways that make the terminal entry recognizable as a specific form more reflective than the ordinary administrative entry, more specifically engaged with the meaning of the experience being documented rather than simply the factual content of the events, more clearly addressed to a future reader, even when no future reader is specified, as though the approach of the end activates the specific human impulse to be witnessed that the ordinary terminal entry does not need to engage, because the ordinary terminal entry is produced in circumstances where the question of being witnessed has not yet become acute. What the last transmission locations reveal about the franchise's understanding of the specific relationship between human communication and human catastrophe is the understanding that the franchise has developed with particular care. Across its full canonical history, the understanding that the impulse to communicate is among the most specifically human things that human beings do, and that the catastrophe's most devastating consequence is not the elimination of the specific communication infrastructure that the pre-war world had built, but the elimination of the specific social context within which communication had its ordinary meaning. The radio tower and the holotape player and the computer terminal all survived the bombs in the specific locations where they were maintained, and where the physics of the wasteland's 2 centuries of unmaintained operation did not destroy them. The specific social context within which the communications they broadcast or store or record had their meaning did not survive. The last transmission is therefore not simply the documentation of a final communication between specific people. It is the specific evidence of the specific gap between the endurance of the communication and the ending of its presence. Context: the gap that the franchise has placed in its most carefully observed unmarked locations as the particular form of human story that the wasteland tells most directly about what the bombs destroyed and what they left behind. The bones are arranged in a way that bones do not arrange themselves. This is the first observation that the franchise's unmarked crime scene locations most consistently require of the player who encounters them. The observation that the specific arrangement of the physical evidence in the specific location communicates something about the specific events that produced the arrangement that the physical evidence alone cannot establish, but that the combination of the physical evidence and the inference that its specific character invites makes sufficiently available to reconstruct with the specific confidence that comes from evidence whose arrangement is too precise to be accidental. The bones are in a specific position relative to each other and relative to the specific features of the surrounding environment, and the specific position communicates something about the specific circumstances of the specific person's final hours, in a way that the position of randomly arranged bones would not communicate something about where the person was and what the person was doing and what the specific sequence of events was that produced the specific arrangement that the player now encounters in the specific unmarked location where the arrangement has been waiting for 200 years or for whatever shorter period of post-war time has passed since the specific events that produced it. The unmarked crime scene locations of Fallout New Vegas's Mojave Wasteland are among the franchise's most specifically developed examples of environmental storytelling organized around the specific task of reconstruction, around the specific challenge of taking the available physical evidence and assembling it into the specific account of what happened in the specific location that the evidence makes most available. The Mojave is a landscape whose specific physical character, its aridity, its clarity of air and light, its specific quality of preserving physical evidence across longer periods than the more humid environments of the capital wasteland, makes it particularly suited to the specific form of environmental storytelling that the unmarked crime scene location requires, which is the form that depends on the physical evidence maintaining the specific integrity of its arrangement across the period between the events that produced it and the player's encounter with it. The Mojave's unmarked crime scene locations are not simply interesting in the way that any discovery is interesting. They are organized around a specific question that the physical evidence raises and that the player's engagement with the evidence can address, whose specific answer the evidence makes available, without the institutional framework of a named quest organizing the player's access to that answer. The skeleton with the specific wound pattern and the specific weapon in the specific position relative to the specific skeleton communicates the most fundamental level of the reconstruction, establishes that a specific person died in a specific way in this specific location, which is the beginning of the reconstruction rather than its entirety. The additional evidence, the personal effects, the note, the holotape, the specific arrangement of other objects relative to the skeleton, the specific features of the immediate environment that explain what the person was doing in this specific location before the specific events that produced the skeleton's current position is what the careful engagement with the unmarked crime scene location provides beyond the fundamental level, and it is what the franchise has placed with the specific care of a developer who understood that the most affecting unmarked location is not the location that simply shows the player that something happened, but the location that makes it possible for the player to reconstruct what specifically happened to a specific person in the specific circumstances of a specific life that the wasteland was the context for. The specific crime scene locations in the capital wasteland, whose pre-war character makes them the most specifically affecting. Examples of this location type are locations where the crime documented predates the bombs, where the specific events, reconstructible from the physical evidence, occurred in the specific conditions of the pre-war world, and where the preservation of the evidence across the 2 centuries since the bombs is the specific consequence, the wasteland's arrested quality, rather than of any post-war event's proximity. The pre-war crime scene in the wasteland is the most specifically disorienting form of the unmarked crime scene location, because it places the player in the specific position of being the first person to examine evidence of an event that the pre-war world's own investigative infrastructure would have examined if the bombs had not eliminated that infrastructure before the investigation could be completed. The evidence has been waiting for 200 years for the investigation that the pre-war world owed to the specific person the crime was committed against, waiting, not for any particular investigator, but for whatever investigative attention the specific location might eventually receive. The player who engages carefully with the environmental evidence of the pre-war crime scene is performing, 200 years after the fact, the investigative function that the pre-war world's institutions were supposed to perform and that the bombs prevented from being performed. There is no institutional consequence to what the player discovers. There is no authority to report to and no accountability mechanism to activate and no justice to be administered. There is only the specific knowledge of what happened to a specific person in a specific location in the pre-war world and the specific quality of moral weight that knowledge produces in the player who has assembled it from the physical evidence of an unmarked location that the Pip-Boy's map does not mark. What the unmarked crime scene locations reveal about the specific relationship between the wasteland and the concept of justice is the relationship that the franchise has always understood as one of the wasteland's most specifically defining features, the relationship of a landscape that contains abundant evidence of events that the pre-war world's justice system would have been required to address, and that the post-war world has no institutional infrastructure for addressing, in which the physical evidence of specific crimes against specific people persists across centuries without any available mechanism for converting that evidence into the institutional categories of accountability and consequence that the concept of justice requires. The crime scene, without an investigation, is not simply an interesting puzzle for the player to solve. It is the specific emblem of what the wasteland is as a moral landscape, which is a landscape in which the specific events that the pre-war world's moral framework would have required to be addressed are present in their physical evidence and absent in their institutional consequences, in which the specific people who were harmed by specific events are present in the evidence of the harm done to them and absent in any form that could receive the acknowledgement that the harm deserved. The bones in the specific arrangement communicate what happened. The wasteland provides no mechanism for addressing what happened. The player who reconstructs what happened from the physical evidence of the unmarked crime scene location has performed the only available acknowledgement of the specific person whose bones constitute the available evidence has engaged with the specific fact of their specific end in the specific way that the unmarked location makes available, which is the way of attention rather than the way of institutional response, the way of genuine engagement with the specific human reality documented in the physical evidence rather than the way of the institutional processing of that reality into the administrative categories of crime and consequence and resolution. The attention is the only justice the wasteland can provide. The franchise has placed the crime scene without investigation in its unmarked locations as the specific acknowledgement that the attention, however inadequate to the full moral weight of what the evidence documents, is something rather than nothing, is the specific form of acknowledgement that the specific person whose bones are arranged in the specific way, in the specific location, deserves from whoever wanders past with the specific quality of attention required to notice that the arrangement is not accidental. The laboratory was not on any official map of the pre-war research establishment's institutional geography. This is the first and most important observation about the specific category of unmarked research location that the franchise has distributed across its different regional settings with the specific consistency of a deliberate thematic commitment. The observation that the research being conducted in the specific location was research that the official institutional geography had not sanctioned in the specific sense of having assigned it a named facility and a documented research program, and the specific forms of institutional oversight that named facilities and documented research programs nominally received. The laboratory existed in the specific gap between the official research establishment and the wasteland's general landscape in the specific category of location that is neither the named research facility with its documented program and its institutional affiliations and its connection to the specific government contracts that organized the pre-war research establishment's priorities, nor the simply domestic or commercial space that the surrounding wastelands geography is primarily composed of. It is something in between, a space that someone had converted to research purposes without the specific institutional authorization that conversion would have required in the pre-war regulatory environment, or a space that had been a sanctioned facility and that a specific individual had continued to use for research purposes after the specific institutional infrastructure that had sanctioned it had ceased to function. The specific category of research conducted in these unmarked locations is the category that the official institutional record does not contain, because the official institutional record was organized around the specific research programs that the official institutions had authorized, and the research in these locations was authorized by nothing except the specific individual or small group whose commitment to the specific research question, the location documents, had been sufficient to sustain the research in the faith, specific conditions of whatever circumstances had brought them to that specific location. The unmarked research locations of the capital wasteland are among the most specifically documented of the franchise's examples of this location type, in the specific sense that the capital wasteland's particular density of pre-war infrastructure and the specific character of the 2 centuries of post-war life that had occurred within its geography had produced a landscape particularly rich in the specific evidence of research activities that had been conducted outside the official institutional framework. The small laboratory in the specific unmarked building, whose pre-war function is not legible from the building's exterior, whose specific research content becomes available only to the player who enters and examines the building. Interior, with the specific quality of attention that the absence of any quest marker or map designation leaves entirely to the player's own initiative, is a laboratory whose specific equipment and specific documentary record, specific physical evidence of the research activities it housed, communicate the specific character of the research without providing the institutional context that would explain why it was being conducted in this specific location outside the official framework. The equipment is real equipment, the specific instruments and the specific materials and the specific technical infrastructure of a genuine research program rather than an improvised or amateur attempt to replicate research, capabilities that the researcher lacked the training to employ. This was a trained researcher conducting genuine research in an unofficial location. The specific reason for the location's unofficial character is something the documentary record of the location sometimes establishes and sometimes does not. Sometimes the terminal entries or the holotapes or the personal notes of the researcher document the specific circumstances that had produced the separation between the research and the official institutional framework within which it would ordinarily have been conducted, and sometimes they do not, leaving the specific character of the separation available only as inference from the available evidence. The research itself is the most specifically affecting dimension of these locations, not simply the fact of research being conducted outside the official framework, but the specific character of what was being researched and what the research had produced in the specific people conducting it. The unmarked research location in the capital wasteland, whose terminal entries document a researcher's progressive engagement with a specific biological or chemical or physical phenomenon, is a location whose most important content, the specific arc of the researcher's intellectual engagement with their subject, the specific sequence of observations and hypotheses and experimental results and revised hypotheses that the terminal record preserves as the full documentary trace of a specific human mind engaging with a specific question in the specific conditions of whatever circumstances the location documents. The arc is often troubling in the specific way that research arcs are troubling when they are conducted without the external accountability that genuine oversight provides. The arc that begins with a genuine question and a genuine commitment to the methods of its investigation, and that moves across the entries in the terminal record toward outcomes that the researcher's initial framework had not anticipated, and that the researcher's continued engagement with the research in the absence of external accountability had not produced a mechanism for addressing. The researcher gets further in. The question deepens. The specific methods required to pursue the deepening question exceed what the original ethical framework of the research had specified. The terminal entries document the specific progression without providing the external voice that would have required the researcher to engage with what the progression was producing in the specific terms of its human cost. The last terminal entry is often the most affecting, often the entry in which the researcher's engagement with what the research has produced has reached a point that the terminal's documentation can no longer contain in the administrative register of research notes, and has spilled over into something more personal, more reflective, more specifically engaged with the question of what the research has made of the person who conducted it. The unmarked research location in the Mojave wasteland that documents a specific individual's independent investigation of a specific pre-war phenomenon in the specific conditions of the post-war desert environment is a location whose particular quality of isolation, the Mojave's specific geographic character of exposure and visibility, and the specific quality of being a landscape where concealment requires active effort rather than simply the occupation of any available interior space, communicates something about the specific circumstances that had produced the research in this specific location, that the more enclosed and more infrastructure-dense capital wastelands research locations do not communicate in quite the same register. The Mojave researcher is in the desert because the desert provides something the research requires: the specific isolation from the social and institutional landscape of the more populated post-war settlements, the specific environmental conditions that the research's subject demands, or the specific physical distance from whatever institutional or personal circumstances had produced the need for research conducted far from the available infrastructure. The distance is itself information about the research, about the specific character of a commitment to a question sufficiently powerful to have brought a specific person to the specific location of the Mojave's most remote corners in the specific conditions of the post-war desert environment, which are conditions that the available documentary evidence of the franchise's most carefully observed Mojave locations communicates as genuinely difficult in the specific practical sense of daily survival in a landscape organized around the specific challenges that the wasteland's conditions present to human habitation without institutional support. What the full accounting of the franchise's unmarked research locations reveals about the specific relationship between the impulse to investigate and the institutional frameworks that ordinarily organize that impulse is the observation that the impulse precedes and exceeds the frameworks that the specific human drive to understand the specific phenomena of the world that are not yet understood is sufficiently fundamental to what human beings are that it continues in the absence of the institutional infrastructure that had organized it in the pre-war world, continues in the specific locations where the specific individuals who carry it find themselves with the specific resources and the specific circumstances that make the continuation possible. The unmarked research locations are the specific evidence of this continuation of research that persisted, not because the institutional framework required it to persist, but because the specific individuals conducting it, constitutionally unable to stop pursuing the specific questions that the research was organized around, in the specific conditions of whatever circumstances the wasteland had produced for them, with the specific resources available in the specific locations where they found themselves. This is the wasteland's relationship to the pre-war research establishment, not the relationship of simple destruction and loss. though the destruction was real and the loss was comprehensive. But the relationship of a landscape that had eliminated the institutional framework while being unable to eliminate the human impulse, the framework had been designed to organize and channel and in certain crucial dimensions to constrain. The research continues in the unmarked locations. The institutional constraint that had nominally governed it is gone. What the combination of these two facts produces is what the franchise's most carefully observed unmarked research locations document, and what they document is, characteristically, both genuinely significant as evidence of the human investigative impulse's persistence, and genuinely troubling as evidence of what that persistence produces in the absence of the external accountability that the institutional framework, however imperfectly, had been providing. The settlement had a name. This is the observation that the franchise's unmarked evidence of failed communities most specifically communicates the observation that the specific collection of structures and the specific arrangement of the domestic communal space and the specific physical evidence of organized communal life that the player encounters in the specific unmarked location was not always simply rubble and abandoned infrastructure, but was at some specific point in the fairness, post-war history of the specific regional setting, a place where specific people had organized themselves into the specific social formation of a community and had given that formation the specific human significance of a name. The name may survive in the documentary record of the location in the holotape recordings and the terminal entries and the personal notes that the franchise's most carefully observed failed community locations preserve as the evidence of the community's internal life, or it may not, leaving the specific name of the specific community unavailable to the player who encounters the physical evidence of its former existence and must engage with the location as simply the unnamed evidence of something that once had a name. Either way, the name, its presence or its absence, is the specific dimension of the failed community location that most directly communicates what the location is, which is not simply the ruins of structures, but the remains of the specific social formation of people who had decided, in the specific conditions of the post-war wasteland, to organize their existence around each other rather than individually, and who had given that organization the specific human weight of a shared identity expressed in the shared name. The physical evidence of the failed community in the franchise's unmarked locations is the evidence of people who were trying to build something in conditions that had eliminated most of the resources and infrastructure that building requires, trying to build shelter and safety and the specific forms of communal organization that human beings develop when they are in the same place for long enough to understand that their individual survival is better served by collective arrangement than by individual effort. The evidence of the trying is visible in the specific character of the physical structures, in the specific improvised quality of the construction, which is the quality of construction that uses the specific materials available in the specific location rather than the materials that purpose-built construction would have specified. And that produces the specific aesthetic of post-war improvisation that is simultaneously a testament to the builder's resourcefulness and a documentation of the specific material poverty of the conditions within which the community had been attempting to establish itself. The walls that were built from salvaged pre-war materials, the roofs that were constructed from whatever combination of intact structural elements and improvised covering the available inventory permitted, the specific domestic and communal arrangements visible in the layout of the space. All of these communicate something about the specific quality of the human effort that had produced the community, which was genuine effort organized around genuine collective intention and constrained by the specific material conditions of a landscape that had been comprehensively stripped of the resources that building ordinarily requires. The documentary record of the failed community, when the location contains a documentary record in the form of terminal entries or holotapes or personal journals, is the most direct and available access to the specific interior. life of the community that the physical evidence cannot provide. The physical evidence documents what the community built. The documentary record documents what the community was, what the specific social dynamics of the specific people who had organized themselves around each other had produced in the specific conditions of their shared existence, what the specific challenges of communal life in the wasteland had generated in terms of conflict and cooperation, and the specific forms of collective decision-making that the community had developed for addressing the specific challenges that its existence in the specific location had produced. The terminal entry that documents a community meeting about the specific practical challenge of the community's water supply, or the holotape recording that documents a specific interpersonal conflict between specific community members, or the personal journal that documents an individual community member's experience of the specific social dynamics of the community from within. These are the specific forms of evidence that communicate the community's interior life with the directness that only documentary evidence produced from within the social formation can provide. The evidence of why the community failed is the dimension of the failed community location that the franchise has addressed with the most sustained care and the greatest range of specific answers, because the specific reasons for the community failed. Failure of any specific unmarked post-war community are among the most specifically informative available evidence about the specific conditions of the wasteland and the specific challenges that those conditions present to the human project of collective life. Some communities failed because the specific location's resources proved insufficient to sustain the specific population that had organized itself within it, because the water table that had seemed adequate at the time of the program community's founding proved inadequate to the community's actual consumption requirements, or because the soil that had seemed cultivable proved resistant to the specific cultivation methods the community had available, or because the specific combination of environmental challenges that the location presented exceeded the community's collective capacity to address them with the specific resources it had. Some communities failed because of external threats, because the specific combination of raider pressure and creature activity and the general hostility of the wasteland's environment toward organized human settlements proved more than the community's defensive capacity could manage in the specific conditions of the community's location and the specific resources available for its defense. Some communities failed because of internal dynamics, because the specific social tensions that communal life in conditions of scarcity and stress generates proved impossible to manage through whatever conflict resolution mechanisms the community had developed, because the specific people who had organized the community proved unable to maintain the specific forms of collective trust and mutual investment that communal life requires across the specific challenges that the community's existence in the wasteland had produced. What the franchise's unmarked failed community locations reveal about the specific human project of building something together in the wasteland is the observation that the project is simultaneously the most genuinely human available response to the wasteland's conditions and the most specifically vulnerable response to those conditions, that the specific choice to organize one's existence around other people rather than around one's individual survival is the choice that produces the most genuine human achievement and the most specific forms of human loss when what the organization produced is destroyed. The failed community is not simply the evidence of failure in the simple sense of an attempt that did not succeed. It is the evidence of something that was real, of a specific social formation, of specific people who had committed themselves to each other in the specific way that community requires, and whose commitment had produced something that the wasteland's conditions subsequently eliminated. The commitment was real before it was eliminated. The something that it produced was real before it was destroyed. The unmarked location preserves the evidence of both the reality and its elimination in the specific form of the physical remains, and the documentary record that the franchise has placed in these locations with the specific care of world builders who understood that what they were documenting was not failure in the abstract, but the specific human cost of attempting something genuinely worth attempting in conditions that made the attempt genuinely difficult. The ghoul in the unmarked building has been there since before the current generation of wasteland inhabitants was born. This is the observation that the franchise's long-wait locations most specifically require the observation that the specific person the player encounters in the specific unmarked location has been in that location, not simply for a long time in the ordinary sense, that people sometimes remain in one place for extended periods, but for a duration that the specific biology of ghoulification has made possible in ways that ordinary human biology would not have permitted, and that the specific quality of 2 centuries of continued existence in the specific conditions of the specific location has produced in the specific person a relationship to time and to the world and to the specific concept of being still alive that no ordinary frame of reference for human experience adequately accounts for. The ghoul has outlasted the civilization. The ghoul has outlasted the specific institutional frameworks and the specific social formations and the specific human communities that had organized the world in which the ghoul had been a person before the radiation that produced the ghoulification had reorganized them into something that the pre-war world's categories of human experience had not included. The ghoul has outlasted every other person who had known them in the specific way that people know each other when the specific institutional and personal contexts of their relationship are still intact, every colleague and neighbor, and friend and family member, and the specific extended network of acquaintances and professional contacts, and the various other categories of human connection through which the pre-war world had organized its social life. The ghoul is still here, everyone else is gone. The specific quality of what the continued being here produces in the specific consciousness of the person who has borne it is what the franchise's most carefully observed long-wait locations are organized around, communicating. The unmarked ghouls of the franchise's different regional settings are not always the threatening raiders of their kind that the wasteland's combat encounters most frequently produce, are not always the feral ghouls whose specific biological degeneration has eliminated the specific cognitive and social capabilities that distinguish a person from a biological threat. Some of the unmarked ghouls are people, are the specific persons that 2 centuries of continued existence in the specific conditions of the wasteland has produced from the specific individuals who had been ghoulified in the specific circumstances of the bomb's initial detonation or the subsequent radiation environment. The unmarked ghoul who is a person is among the most specifically affecting encounters that the franchise's unmapped wandering produces, not because of any dramatic narrative content that the encounter provides, which in the case of most unmarked ghoul characters is limited to the specific exchange of dialogue that the game permits with the specific NPC, but because of the specific quality of what the encounter communicates about the specific experience of being the person who has been in this specific location for this specific duration of time, in the specific conditions that 2 centuries of post-war wasteland life in that location have produced. The specific things that the long-wait ghouls know that the other inhabitants of the wasteland do not and cannot know are among the most specifically valuable available evidence about the specific character of the pre-war world and the specific events of the transition between the pre-war world and the post-war wasteland that the franchise's documentary record provides. The ghoul who was alive when the bombs fell knows what the pre-war world actually looked and sounded and felt like from the inside of the specific experience of living in it, not as historical evidence reconstructed from the available documentary record, but as the specific embodied memory of a person who was there, who moved through the specific spaces of the pre-war world as their ordinary daily environment, who had the specific relationships and the specific professional life and the specific daily routine that the pre-war world organized for the specific people within it. The ghoul's memory of the pre-war world is the most directly personal available evidence of what that world was more personal than the terminal entries and the holotapes and the promotional materials and the institutional records that constitute the franchise's other primary documentary sources, because those sources are mediated by the specific purposes for which they were produced, and the ghoul's memory is mediated only by the specific filters of individual perspective and the specific distortions that 2 centuries of post-ghoulification existence have introduced into whatever cognitive processes support the ghoul's memory. The specific unmarked ghoul locations of the Commonwealth carry the additional dimension that the Fallout 4 pre-war prologue introduces into every engagement with the survival of a specific consciousness across the full span of 210 years. The dimension of having been shown, however briefly and however approximately, the specific world that the ghoul remembers and that the player is now encountering in the specific form of a person who has been carrying that memory through 2 centuries of the specific conditions that the Commonwealth's post-war history had produced. The Commonwealth ghoul, who remembers the pre-war world in the specific terms of lived experience, is remembering a world that the player has also experienced in the specific, limited, but genuine form of the game's pre-war prologue, and the specific overlap between the ghoul's memory and the player's own experience of the pre-war Commonwealth produces a particular quality of recognition in the encounter with the long-wait ghoul that the encounters with ghouls in the franchise's other regional settings, whose pre-war world the player has not experienced, do not produce in quite the same register. The survivors in unmarked locations, who are not ghouls, who are ordinary human beings, whose presence in specific unmarked locations documents a specific duration of post-war existence in the specific conditions of those locations, are the long-wait locations human equivalent, and their specific quality of presence in their specific locations communicates something about the specific form of human persistence that the wasteland produces in the people who have been in the same place for long enough that the place has become inseparable from their identity in a way that the ordinary human relationship to location does not typically produce. The survivor who has been in the same specific location for a decade or 2 decades or longer, in the specific conditions of the wasteland's challenges and the specific absence of any institutional framework that would have organized their relationship to their location in ways other than simple continued presence, has developed a relationship to the specific location that exceeds what the word inhabit typically implies, a relationship whose specific character the franchise communicates through the specific quality of the NPC's dialogue and the specific evidence of the location's physical arrangement, which together document the specific ways in which a person and a place become organized around each other across the extended duration of shared existence in difficult conditions. What the long-wait locations reveal about the franchise's most sustained engagement with the question of what endurance costs is the observation that endurance is not simply the persistence of the biological substrate, not simply the continued functioning of the body's systems in the specific conditions of the wasteland's challenges, but the persistence of the specific person within the biological substrate, the specific consciousness and the specific set of relationships and the specific understanding of oneself and the world that constitute the person rather than simply the organism. The ghoul has persisted biologically in ways that ordinary human biology would not have permitted. Whether the specific person who was ghoulified in the specific circumstances of the bomb's initial effects has persisted in the same sense, whether the specific consciousness and the specific relationships and the specific self-understanding of the pre-ghoulification person are continuous with the specific consciousness and the specific relationships and the specific self-understanding of the post-ghoulification being who has been in the crisis. Specific location for 2 centuries is the question that the franchise's most honest, long-wait locations raise without resolving. because the franchise has always understood that the question of what persists across radical biological transformation and across the specific duration of 2 centuries of post-transformation existence in the wasteland is a question that the available evidence does not cleanly answer, and that the honest examination of the available evidence requires leaving open. The desk in the pre-war office still has papers on it. This is the specific observation that the franchise's unmarked pre-war secret locations most characteristically open, with the specific evidence that the specific space being examined was a space organized around a specific pre-war activity, that the bombs preserved in the specific arrested condition of the moment when the activity was interrupted, and that the activity being conducted in the specific space at the specific moment of interruption was an activity whose character the available evidence makes available for reconstruction in ways that the official pre-war institutional record does not provide access to. The papers on the desk are not the institutional documentation of an officially sanctioned program, are not the research reports and the administrative memoranda and the specific forms of bureaucratic paper trail that the official pre-war institutional record is composed of, and that the franchise's named locations document in the specific, comprehensive detail of a world-building project organized around the institutional life of the pre-war world as its primary documentary source. The papers on the desk are something else, are the specific, personal, and operational documentation of an activity that had its own internal record-keeping requirements and its own specific paper trail, but whose existence in the specific space where the player finds the papers was not an existence that the official institutional geography of the pre-war world had acknowledged as part of the official geography. The pre-war secrets that the franchise's unmarked locations preserve in the specific arrested condition of the wasteland's 2-century freeze are secrets of different kinds and different scales, organized around the specific variety of things that the pre-war world's most powerful institutional actors had found it necessary or advantageous to conduct outside the specific visibility of the official institutional record. Some are the specific secrets of individuals, the specific personal histories, and the specific personal activities, and the specific personal relationships that the individual had organized outside the official frameworks of the pre-war social and institutional landscape, whose physical evidence the wasteland has preserved in the specific location where those activities had been conducted, and that the player encounters in the specific condition of evidence that has been waiting since the bombs fell for whatever attention the wasteland's subsequent 2 centuries of visitors might bring to the specific space where the pre-war secret had been kept. Some are the specific secrets of small groups, the specific collective activities, and the specific operational histories of people who had organized themselves around a shared objective or a shared interest or a shared circumstance, that the official pre-war institutional landscape had not provided an official framework for, and that had therefore been conducted in the specific, unofficial locations where the physical evidence of the activity now waits. Some are the specific secrets of institutions, the smaller scale institutional secrets that are distinct from the comprehensive institutional deceptions of the Vault program and the FEV research establishment, in the specific sense of being organized around specific local objectives and specific local circumstances, rather than around the comprehensive program of the pre-war research and defense establishment's most ambitious institutional actors. The unmarked location in the Commonwealth's pre-war geography that documents a specific pre-war crime whose physical evidence has been preserved across 210 years in the specific condition of the moment when the crime was committed, or in the specific condition of whatever interval between the crime's commission and the bomb's detonation had elapsed before the wasteland's arrested quality took hold of the evidence, is a location whose particular quality of horror is the horror of a crime for which the pre-war institutional framework for accountability had been specifically and deliberately circumvented. The evidence in the specific location establishes what happened with sufficient clarity to make the specific event reconstructible from the physical evidence and the documentary record. The specific actor whose decisions produced the event is identifiable from the same evidence. The specific circumstance that allowed the event to occur without the pre-war justice system's intervention is documented in the documentary record with the specific matter-of-fact quality of institutional documentation, recording a situation that the institution had specifically organized itself around managing in the direction that produced the outcome, and the physical evidence documents. The pre-war world had a justice system. The justice system had been specifically circumvented in this specific case. The bombs fell before the circumvention could be addressed through any available institutional mechanism. The evidence has been waiting in the specific location for 210 years, in the specific condition of evidence that the institution whose circumvention produced the crime had specifically organized itself around preventing from becoming available to the institutional accountability framework that would have been required to address it. The personal spaces in the franchise's unmapped pre-war domestic locations that preserve specific pre-war personal histories in the specific form of the physical evidence of specific lives are the most directly human. Examples of the pre-war secret locations, documentary content. The locations that document, not the secrets of institutions or of organized groups, but the specific private histories of specific individuals whose pre-war existence had dimensions that the individual had organized outside the official frameworks of the pre-war social and institutional landscape. The letter that was hidden rather than sent, whose physical presence in the specific location where it had been hidden communicates the specific character of the relationship it documents and the specific circumstances that had made the hiding necessary. The personal journal whose specific contents establish a pre-war individual's engagement with a specific dimension of their experience that the official frameworks of the pre-war social landscape had not provided a sanctioned category for. The specific personal objects whose arrangement in the specific location communicates the specific character of a pre-war life whose full reality was not available to the official record of that life, whose specific dimensions were managed outside the official frameworks in the specific way that people manage the dimensions of their experience that the available social frameworks do not accommodate. What these personal pre-war secret locations reveal about the specific pre-war world they document is the observation that the official pre-war record, comprehensive as it is in the specific dimensions that the revealed pre-war world is, franchise's named locations document does not capture the full range of what the specific people of the pre-war world were and experienced and organized their lives around. The official record documents the institutional life of the pre-war civilization with extraordinary specificity. The unmarked locations, documenting pre-war personal secrets, document the personal life of specific pre-war individuals in the specific dimensions that the institutional record was not organized to capture, and that those individuals had specific reasons to manage outside the institutional record's reach. The combination of the official record and the personal secret location produces a more complete portrait of the pre-war world than either produces alone, a portrait that includes both the comprehensive institutional framework that organized the civilization's collective life and the specific individual lives that were lived within that framework in ways that the framework's official categories did not fully accommodate. The specific pre-war personal objects that appear in the franchise's most carefully observed unmarked pre-war locations are objects whose significance is entirely relational, whose meaning is not available from the relational object itself, but from the specific relationship between the object and the specific person who kept it in the specific location where the player finds it. The photograph of a person whose identity the documentary record of the location does not establish, whose presence in the specific location communicates something about the specific relationship between the photograph's subject and the person who kept it. A relationship whose specific character the documentary evidence of the location makes partially but not fully available. The specific piece of pre-war technology in the specific condition of having been modified in a specific way that the technology's original design did not specify, whose modification communicates something about the specific purposes the specific person in the specific location had been using it for. Purposes whose relationship to the official frameworks of pre-war technological use, the modification's specific character establishes as having been outside those frameworks. The key to a specific door in a specific location that the player can find, but that the documentary record of the location does not explain, whose existence in the specific place where it has been waiting for 200 years. Communicates something about the specific significance of the door it opens to the specific person who kept the key, a significance that the absence of any institutional record of the key's existence or the door's contents makes available only to whoever finds, both in the specific condition of unmapped wandering. The most affecting pre-war secret location is the location that documents a pre-war secret that had consequences extending beyond the specific individual who kept it, that documents a secret whose specific character connects the specific private history of a specific pre-war person to the specific public history that the franchise's named locations and official documentary record document. The pre-war secret location that establishes a connection between a specific unmarked location's private history and the specific institutional history of one of the franchise's named institutions, that reveals something about what a specific institution actually was, that the institution's official record does not contain, through the specific evidence of a private location that the institution's official operations had depended on or been organized around, or been specifically designed to conceal, is the location that most directly bridges the private and the institutional dimensions of the pre-war world's character, and that therefore produces the most specifically informative available engagement with what the pre-war world actually was, in the specific sense of what its most powerful institutional actors actually did in the specific conditions of their actual operation, rather than in the conditions of their official self-presentation. The thing in the specific corner of the unmarked location is not immediately legible. This is the specific quality that distinguishes the franchise's inexplicable, unmarked locations from its other location categories. The quality of encountering something whose physical presence in the specific location is clearly intentional, clearly the product of a specific developer decision to place a specific thing in a specific arrangement in a specific location, and whose specific character resists the kind of immediate reconstruction that the crime scene locations and the research locations and the domestic locations permit through the specific legibility of their physical evidence. The thing is there. It is clearly there deliberately. What it means, what the specific arrangement of its specific components in this specific location within the specific context of the Fallout franchise's established universe of explanatory frameworks communicates, is not immediately available to the player who encounters it, and may not become fully available no matter how carefully the player engages with the available evidence, because the franchise has placed certain things in certain locations with the specific intention of maintaining the specific ambiguity that the inexplicable location embodies, rather than with the intention of providing all the specific evidence required for a complete reconstruction. The alien-adjacent locations of the franchise's different regional settings are among the most specifically documented examples of this location category. The locations whose physical evidence gestures toward the specific, the framework of extraterrestrial contact that the franchise has maintained as a consistent, if ambiguous, dimension of its universe across its full canonical history. The crashed spacecraft in the specific unmarked location of the capital wasteland is not the named location of the alien crash site. quest is not the location that the official game structure directs the player toward through the specific mechanism of a discoverable holotape that provides the map marker that initiates the investigation. It is a different location, or a location whose relationship to the named location the game's geography has not specified, or a location whose existence in the specific corner of the capital wasteland where the unmapped wanderer finds it is the specific evidence of a crash event whose relationship to the named alien encounter, locations of the franchise's official structure, the documentary record of the location does not establish. The physical evidence of the crash is specific enough to communicate that something came down in this specific location from a direction that was not horizontal, that whatever left the specific impression in the specific landscape, the feature had been traveling at a speed and from a direction that the available physics of the franchise's established universe associates with objects whose origin was not the Commonwealth's surface. What specifically came down, and what happened to it after it came down, and what the specific relationship is between this specific, unmarked location and the broader framework of the franchise's engagement with the question of what is in the universe, beyond the pre-war world's specifically terrestrial concerns. These are questions that the physical evidence of the location raises without providing the specific evidentiary foundation for a definitive answer. The paranormal adjacent locations of the franchise's unmarked geography are the category whose relationship to the franchise's established explanatory frameworks is most specifically complex. In the sense that the franchise's primary explanatory framework is a materially organized universe in which the specific effects that conventional fiction assigns to the supernatural are consistently explained through the specific mechanisms of radiation, biology, and advanced pre-war technology, and the particular combination of post-war conditions that the bombs and their aftermath have produced. The paranormal adjacent unmarked location is a location whose specific physical evidence resists immediate accommodation within this materialist explanatory framework, whose specific combination of observable phenomena, documentary record, and the particular arrangement of whatever objects and environmental features constitute the available evidence produces in the player the specific experience of encountering something that the framework's established categories do not cleanly address. The franchise has never definitively established that the pre-war world's materialist framework is the complete description of the universe it inhabits. It has maintained, across its full canonical history, the specific ambiguity of a universe that does not fully resolve the question of what the most anomalous elements of its specific world actually are, that provides materialist explanations for most anomalous phenomena while preserving a residue of the genuinely inexplicable in the specific corners of the wasteland where the unmapped wanderer most specifically encounters it. The specific unmarked location in the Mojave wasteland, whose documentary record documents a specific individual's sustained engagement with a specific phenomenon that the individual's own documentary language struggles to accommodate within the available materialist frameworks of the pre-war scientific establishment, is one of the franchise's most carefully constructed examples of the inexplicable location carefully constructed in the specific sense that the documentary record is detailed enough to establish the specific character of the individual's engagement with the phenomenon without being detailed enough to establish the specific character of the phenomenon itself with the confidence that the materialist explanation would provide. The individual was a scientist. Their scientific training is visible in the specific quality of the documentary record, in the specific attention to observable detail, and the specific effort to organize observation into testable hypotheses, and the specific honesty about the limits of what the available evidence supports. The phenomenon they were investigating did not yield to the specific explanatory frameworks of the scientific training The terminal entries document the specific progression of a trained scientific mind, encountering something that its training had not prepared it, to accommodate the specific quality of cognitive and professional disorientation that the encounter with the genuinely anomalous produces in people whose relationship to the world had been organized around the assumption that the available explanatory frameworks were sufficient to the world's actual character. The locations that resist accounting through simple inexplicability, through the specific absence of any explanatory context, rather than through the specific presence of a phenomenon that exceeds the available explanatory frameworks, are the strangest category within the franchise's inexplicable location inventory, and the strangest in the specific sense of producing in the player the most specifically unresolvable experience of encountering something whose specific significance is unavailable rather than simply unknown. The arrangement of objects in a specific location whose character communicates intentionality without communicating purpose, whose specific configuration of specific items establishes that someone organized them this way deliberately, without establishing what the deliberate organization was intended to accomplish or communicate. The specific environmental feature whose physical character communicates that something specific occurred in this location without communicating what specifically occurred. The presence in a specific location of a combination of objects whose individual significance within the franchise's established universe is legible, but whose specific combination in this specific location is not legible within any of the frameworks that the franchise's established universe provides for making combinations of objects in specific locations legible. What the inexplicable unmarked locations reveal about the franchise's specific understanding of what the wasteland is about, the specific character of the universe that the franchise has constructed, and the specific relationship between that universe's established explanatory frameworks and the full range of what the universe actually contains, is the revelation that the franchise has never been fully committed to the clean materialism that the dominant register of its explanatory discourse implies. The wasteland is a place where radiation and advanced pre-war technology explain most of the anomalous things that the wasteland contains. It is also a place where the most careful and most sustained engagement with the most specific corners of its unmarked geography produces encounters whose character the radiation and technology framework does not fully address, encounters that the framework can sometimes accommodate through the specific extension of its established categories into new domains, and that it sometimes cannot accommodate without the specific introduction of elements that the framework had not previously specified. The franchise maintains this specific ambiguity as a formal commitment rather than as a failure of internal consistency, as the specific understanding that a universe of the Fallout franchise's ambition and scope should be permitted to contain things whose specific character exceeds the specific explanatory frameworks that the universe's dominant register provides, and that the specific corners of the wasteland where those things are encountered are the most honest, available expression of what the franchise understands the wasteland to be, which is not a place whose every dimension is fully legible to the specific frameworks that the franchise's official institutional geography provides for making things legible, but a place that exceeds the frameworks in the specific ways that the most carefully observed unmarked locations make most directly available. The wanderer who has been moving through the wasteland without the quest markers, who has been engaging with the landscape in the specific mode of unmapped attention that the franchise's unmarked locations require, has been accumulating something across the full span of the wandering that is different from what the quest structure accumulates in the player who follows it. The quest structure accumulates narrative, the specific forward motion of storylines, whose development the quest markers facilitate, and whose completion the quest structure registers as the specific form of achievement that the prefective official geography of the franchise's named locations is organized around producing. The unmapped wandering accumulates something else, something whose character, the franchise's most careful world builders, understood as the most important available content of the wasteland's geography, even though the official structure of the game's design organizes most of the player's engagement around the narrative content rather than around it. What the unmapped wandering accumulates is the specific portrait of the wasteland that the named locations and the quest structure cannot produce. The portrait assembled from the specific details of the domestic spaces and the children's evidence and the last transmissions and the crime scenes and the research locations and the failed communities and the long-wait survivors and the pre-war secrets and the inexplicable arrangements accumulated across the specific duration of the wandering into the specific cumulative understanding of the wasteland as a place whose most important contents are not the contents that the Pip-Boy's map marks. The cumulative portrait is not a comfortable portrait. The franchise has never been interested in producing a comfortable portrait of the wasteland, has always understood that the most honest, available engagement with what the wasteland is requires the specific willingness to look at the specific things that the wasteland contains without the specific comfort of the narrative distance that the quest structure provides for the player's engagement with the franchise's most difficult material. The quest structure provides a specific form of narrative mediation, a defined objective, a resolution, a context within which the specific events and the specific evidence encountered in the course of the quest acquire the specific significance that the quest's narrative framework assigns to them. The unmarked location provides none of this. The unmarked location is simply there, in the specific condition of whatever the wasteland has produced in the specific time since whatever produced the location, available to whatever engagement the player chooses to bring, without any institutional framework for organizing that engagement or managing its emotional consequences. The unmapped wanderer encounters the wasteland's most difficult material without the narrative mediation of the quest structure, and what the encounter produces in the player who sustains the engagement is the cumulative portrait whose specific character the franchise has been building across its full canonical history through the specific care with which it has populated the wasteland's unmarked geography. The specific understanding that the cumulative portrait produces, the specific thing that the sustained engagement with the franchise's unmarked locations across the full span of unmapped wandering in any of its regional settings communicates is the understanding that the wasteland is a place constituted by the specific human experiences of the specific people who inhabit or inhabited it in ways that the official geography of named locations does not fully represent. The named locations represent the institutional life of the wasteland, the settlements and the factions, and the quest-connected characters whose specific histories and specific circumstances the franchise's narrative structure has organized its engagement around. The unmarked locations represent the personal life of the wasteland, the specific individual experiences, and the specific private histories and the specific human realities of the specific people whose existence the official geography does not track and the quest structure does not direct the player toward. The combination of the official geography and the unmarked geography produces the most complete available portrait of the wasteland's actual character, the portrait that includes both the institutional life and the personal life, both the named and the unnamed, both the tracked and the untracked, both the things the Pip-Boy's map marks and the things it does not. The most important thing, the cumulative portrait communicates the specific observation that the sustained engagement with the franchise's unmarked locations most directly and most consistently produces is the observation that the wasteland is overwhelmingly populated by people who are doing ordinary things. The named locations document the specific people whose specific circumstances and specific actions and specific connections to specific institutional structures and specific narrative events made them available to be named and tracked, quested, The unmarked locations document the specific people who were not doing any of those things, who were setting tables and raising children and sending transmissions and conducting independent research and building communities and surviving in specific locations for extended durations and keeping pre-war secrets and encountering inexplicable phenomena in the specific conditions of the specific wasteland that the specific civilization had produced through its specific catastrophic ending. The ordinary people in the ordinary circumstances that the unmarked locations document are the wasteland's most numerous inhabitants, are the specific human reality whose aggregate constitutes the wasteland's actual population in the sense of the people who were actually living in it, as distinct from the specific subset of that population whose specific connections to specific institutional structures and specific narrative events make them available to the official geography's categories of the notable and the farther named. The cumulative portrait of the unmapped wandering is the portrait of the ordinary majority whose specific existence the official geography cannot fully accommodate, and whose specific human reality the franchise has distributed across the wasteland's unmarked geography with the specific care of world builders who understood that the ordinary majority was the most important thing the wasteland contained. What the cumulative portrait ultimately communicates about the franchise's most fundamental commitment, the commitment that the sustained engagement with the unmarked locations makes most directly visible, is the commitment to the specific human weight of the specific individual life in all of its specific ordinariness, to the specific moral significance of the specific person whose specific circumstances the available evidence makes partially visible, to the specific quality of attention that the unmarked location requires and that the unmarked location rewards, with the specific form of understanding that nothing else in the wasteland's geography can produce. The franchise has always been making a specific argument through its world building, an argument about what matters in the specific conditions of a world organized by catastrophe and its aftermath, and the argument has always been the argument that what matters most is not the institutional history and not the political economy and not the specific events that the official record has identified as the period's significant content, but the specific ordinary human lives that were being lived in the specific spaces between the significant events, the specific ordinary human experiences that the catastrophe ended or organized or produced in the specific people who bore them. The unmarked locations are where the franchise makes this argument most directly, where the specific human reality that the official geography cannot fully accommodate is present in the most unmediated form that the franchise's world building has developed for making it available to the player who is willing to wander without a defined destination. The Pip-Boy's map glows in the wasteland's specific darkness, with the specific quality of a technology that survived the civilization it served, that continues to perform its organizational function in the specific conditions of the world that the civilization's ending produced, organizing the wasteland's geography into the specific categories of named locations and tracked quests that the official structure of the game's design has determined are the primary content of the geography. The unmarked locations are not on the map, they are in the wasteland. The distinction between these two facts is the most specific available expression of what the franchise has always understood about the relationship between the official categories through which the wasteland's geography is organized, and the actual character of the wasteland's geography, the observation that the map is an organizational tool rather than a complete description, that the specific categories the map uses to organize the geography capture an important dimension of the geography's content, while leaving uncaptured the specific dimension that the unmapped wandering makes available. The wanderer who turns off the quest marker and moves through the wasteland in the specific mode of unmapped attention is moving through the geography in the specific way that produces the cumulative portrait, is engaging with the wasteland in the specific manner that the franchise's most honest world building most specifically rewards. The map is still there. The wasteland is larger than the map. The most important things in the wasteland are not on it. The wanderer who has been through all of it, who has sat at the table still set for dinner and read the unfinished letter on the counter and found the toy on the bedroom floor and examined the small skeleton in the specific arrangement that communicates what happened to the child who left it there, and tuned the Pip-Boy to the frequency of the broadcast that has been speaking to no one for 200 years, and reconstructed from the available physical evidence what occurred in the specific location where the bones are arranged, in the specific way that bones do not arrange themselves, and stood in the laboratory that no institutional map had ever marked, and read the terminal entries of the researcher whose engagement with the specific research question had carried them past the specific boundaries that the external accountability of the official framework would have maintained, and walked through the physical remains of the community that had built itself in the specific location, and found the long-wait ghoul in the specific unmarked building, and encountered the thing in the specific corner whose specific significance resists the available explanatory frameworks that wanderer has accumulated something whose character the word knowledge does not fully capture, and the word understanding does not fully capture, and the word feeling does not fully capture, something that requires all three terms and still exceeds them in the specific way that the most genuine engagement with the most genuine material always exceeds the available vocabulary for describing what the engagement has produced. What the wanderer has accumulated is the wasteland, not the wasteland of the quest structure and the named locations and the faction politics and the specific narrative events that the official geography of the franchise's different regional settings has organized its engagement around. Not the wasteland as the setting for the specific storylines that the franchise has developed across its canonical history, which is a wasteland that is genuinely significant and genuinely worth the attention the franchise has devoted to it. The wasteland that the unmapped wandering accumulates is the other wasteland, the one that exists in the specific spaces between the quest markers, that is constituted by the specific, untracked human realities of the specific, ordinary people whose existence the official geography cannot accommodate and does not attempt to accommodate. That is present in the specific domestic spaces and the specific children's evidence and the specific last transmissions and the specific crime scenes and the specific independent research and the specific failed communities and the specific long-wait survivors and the specific pre-war secrets and the specific inexplicable arrangements that the wanderer has been encountering across the full span of the unmapped engagement with the landscape that the franchise has distributed across its different regional settings, with the specific consistency of a commitment to making the other wasteland available to whoever chooses to look for it. The other wasteland is not darker than the official wasteland. This is the specific correction that the full engagement with the franchise's unmarked locations requires, the correction of the instinctive assumption that the material, the quest structure, does not direct players toward darker or more disturbing than the material the quest structure does direct them toward, as though the unmarked status of the material were itself evidence of a quality of content too difficult for the official framework to accommodate. The quest structure directs players toward material of extraordinary darkness, toward the vaults and their experimental protocols, toward the factions and their specific institutional brutalities, toward the named characters and their specific histories of loss and complicity, and the particular forms of damage that proximity to the franchise's most powerful institutional actors produces in the people caught within their operational radius. The unmarked locations are not darker than this. They are differently lit from a different angle, illuminating a different dimension of the wasteland's character, organized around a different scale of attention than the quest structure's engagement with the institutionally significant and the historically consequential. The unmarked locations illuminate the personal rather than the institutional, the ordinary rather than the historically significant, the specific individual rather than the specific institutional actor, the specific daily texture of specific lives rather than the specific events that the official record has identified as the period's consequential content. They are not darker, they are more intimate. The intimacy is what produces the specific quality of the encounter, that the unmapped wandering generates the specific quality of proximity to the specific human reality of the wasteland that the quest structures scale of. Engagement does not produce in quite the same register. The franchise has been making a specific argument across its full canonical history about what the wasteland is, and what the specific attention to the wasteland's most honest material reveals about what the pre-war civilization was, and what the catastrophe cost in human terms, and what the post-war world has produced from the specific human material the catastrophe left. The argument is present in the named locations and the quest content and the faction histories and the named characters and all the other elements of the official geography that the franchise has developed with extraordinary care, extraordinary comprehensiveness across its different games and its different regional settings. The argument is also present, and present in its most direct and least mediated form, in the unmarked locations, in the specific domestic spaces, and the specific children's evidence, and the specific last transmissions, and the specific crime scenes without investigations, and the specific independent research, locations, and the specific failed communities, and the specific long-wait survivors, and the specific pre-war secrets, and the specific inexplicable encounters that the franchise has distributed across the wasteland's unmapped geography as the specific form of the argument that only the unmapped wandering can access. The argument is the argument that the most important thing in the wasteland is the specific person, not the specific institutional actor, and not the specific faction representative, and not the specific named character whose connection to the narrative structure makes them available to the official geography's categories of the Brahma, significant, and the trackable. The specific person, the one who set the table and wrote the unfinished letter and raised the child who drew the pictures on the shelter wall and made the recording for the absent recipient and died in the specific arrangement that the crime scene preserves and conducted the research in the unofficial laboratory and tried to build the community in the specific location and survived in the specific unmarked building for longer than the institutional record had any category for, and kept the pre-war secret in the specific space where the physical evidence still waits, and encountered the thing in the specific corner that resists the available explanatory frameworks. The franchise has placed all of these specific people in the wasteland's unmarked geography, not as Easter eggs or developer secrets or optional lore for the completionist player, but as the specific form of its most fundamental commitment, the commitment to the specific moral weight of the specific individual life in all of its specific ordinariness, the commitment that the quest structure can gesture toward but cannot fully make available, because the quest structure's scale of engagement is the institutional scale rather than the personal scale, the scale of the named and the trackable rather than the scale of the specific untracked person in the specific unmarked location whose existence the Pip-Boy's map does not acknowledge, and whose specific human reality the unmapped wandering makes available to whoever wanders past with the specific quality of attention required to notice it. The specific quality of attention required to notice the unmarked location is not a special or rare. Quality of attention is not the attention of the specialist or the completionist or the player with a specific investment in the franchise's extended lore. It is simply the attention that does not have a defined objective, that moves through the landscape without the specific direction of the quest marker, that allows the landscape to present what it contains rather than moving through the landscape in the specific mode organized around reaching the specific destinations. The quest structure has identified as the journey's content. The unmapped wandering is available to any player who chooses to engage with the landscape in this mode, and the specific rewards of the engagement, the cumulative portrait, the specific human content of the specific unmarked locations. The other wasteland are available to any player who makes that choice and sustains it across the specific duration required to encounter the locations that the landscape contains. The franchise has not hidden the other wasteland from any particular category of player. It has simply made it available through a mode of engagement that the quest structure does not direct players toward, and that the Pip-Boys map does not facilitate a mode whose specific rewards are not the rewards that the official structure registers and tracks, but the rewards of the specific quality of understanding that the cumulative portrait produces in the player who has assembled it from the landscape's most honest material. The relationship between the official wasteland and the other wasteland, between the wasteland of the quest structure and the named locations, and the institutional history and the faction politics, and the wasteland of the unmarked domestic spaces, and the children's evidence, and the last transmissions, and the crime scenes, and the independent research, and the failed communities, and the long-wait survivors, and the pre-war secrets, and the inexplicable encounters, is the relationship that the franchise has always maintained as the foundational structure of its world building, which is the relationship of the visible surface to the specific reality that the surface is the surface of. The official wasteland is the surface, the organized, navigable, quest-structured, map-marked surface of a landscape whose character the surface represents accurately at the institutional and narrative scale that the surface is organized to represent. The other wasteland is the specific reality that the surface is the surface of the specific human content of the specific individual lives that the institutional and narrative scale cannot accommodate, and that the unmapped geography preserves in the specific form of the unmarked locations whose content the franchise has developed with the specific care of world builders who understood that the surface, without the specific reality it is the surface of, is a surface without substance, and that the specific substance of the wasteland's landscape is not the institutional history and the faction politics and the named characters and the quest content, but the specific ordinary human lives whose existence in the specific spaces between the named destinations constitutes the landscape's most honest self. What the full accounting of the wasteland's unmarked locations ultimately reveals about what the franchise has been doing across its full canonical history, across the different games and the different regional settings and the different creative teams and the different specific priorities that each iteration of the franchise has brought to the shared project of the wasteland, is the revelation that the franchise has always been doing two things simultaneously, and that the second thing is the thing that the unmapped wandering makes most directly available. The first thing is the thing the official geography most legibly represents, the construction of a specific fictional universe organized around the specific institutional and narrative and historical content that the named locations and the quest structure and the faction politics and the named characters constitute. The second thing is the construction of the other wasteland within the geography of the first, the population of the spaces between the named destinations with the specific human content of the specific ordinary lives that the catastrophe ended and the post-war conditions continued, and that the franchise has documented, location by location and detail by detail, and holotape by holotape, and terminal entry by terminal entry, and personal note by personal note, across the full span of its canonical history, in the specific form of the unmarked locations that the Pip-Boys map does not mark, and that the unmapped wandering makes available. The two wastes are the same wasteland. The surface and the substance are not separate things, but the same thing, examined at different scales of attention: the institutional scale and the personal scale, the named and the unnamed, the tracked and the untracked, the quest-structured and the simply present. The franchise has built both into the same landscape, with the same care and the same commitment to the specific quality of human honesty that is the franchise's most distinctive and most enduring achievement. The wanderer who has moved through the landscape in both modes, who has followed the quest markers toward the named destinations, and who has also wandered without markers into the spaces between, has encountered the wasteland in its fullest available form, has assembled from the combination of the official geography and the unmarked geography, and the most complete available portrait of what the specific fictional universe, the franchise, has built across its full canonical history actually contains. The portrait is not comfortable, and it is not simple, and it is not organized around any single thesis about what the wasteland is, or what the people in it deserve, or what the specific catastrophe that produced it means in any ultimate sense. It is simply specific, the specific accumulation of the specific human content of a specific fictional universe that the franchise has populated with the specific care of world builders who understood that the most important thing in any fictional universe is the specific person in the specific place, whose specific existence the universe has made room for, and that the room for the specific person in the specific place is most honestly made in the specific gaps between the named destinations where the Pip-Boy's map has nothing to mark. The fire is warm in the wasteland's specific darkness. The Pip-Boy glows with the soft green of a technology that survived the civilization it served. Its map displaying the specific names of the specific locations that the official geography has organized the landscape around, and the specific blank spaces between the names where the unmapped wandering has its most honest content. The table somewhere in the suburban ruins is still set for a meal that was never eaten. The transmission is still broadcasting in the specific frequency that the Pip-Boy's scanner can find if the wanderer chooses to tune to it. The small drawings are still on the shelter wall in the specific location that no map marks. The bones are in the specific arrangement in the specific unmarked corner of the specific regional setting where the franchise placed them with the specific care of world builders, making the specific argument that the arrangement is the most direct available expression of. The ghoul in the unmarked building has been there since before anyone currently living in the wasteland was born, and will be there after whoever passes through has passed through. The wasteland contains all of this. The map contains none of it. The distinction is the franchise's most honest statement about what the wasteland is and what the specific attention that the wasteland most deserves consists of. Rest now, wanderer. The unmarked locations are still there, in the specific gaps between the quest markers, the table and the letter, and the toy, and the transmission, and the arrangement of bones, and the terminal entries of the independent researcher, the physical remains of the failed community, and the specific ghoul in the specific unmarked building, and the thing in the specific corner whose specific significance the available frameworks do not resolve. They will be there the next time the landscape is entered. They will be there regardless of whether the next wanderer through the landscape finds them, because the franchise has placed them there, not for any particular wanderer's benefit, but as the specific form of commitment to the specific human content of the specific people whose existence the official geography cannot track. The other wasteland waits in the spaces between the names. The fire burns in the specific darkness. The Geiger counter ticks its patient rhythm. Sleep now, gently, and carry into whatever morning follows the specific understanding that the wasteland's most important contents are the ones the map does not mark, that the most genuine engagement with any landscape, fictional or otherwise, is the engagement that moves through the spaces between the named destinations with the specific quality of attention that notices what the landscape actually contains, rather than simply what the official geography has organized. Landscape around. Sleep well.